A politician, a member of parliament from Murema, has fired such serious barbs at Kalonzo Musyoka ever being president of the Republic of Kenya that imeshtua wengi. Okay, just hold your horses before blood pressure goes too high. Yeah, relax. This MP, to be specific, the Madeira legislator Eric Wamumbi, is a Ruto man. Okay? In fact, his remarks on X, Twitter, sounds very much like Ruto speaking. Okay? But the point of my show here today is to analyze very deeply what the possibilities are for leading presidential candidates in Kenya right now. Shouldn't that be very interesting and more than fascinating? I think so. Because there's some factors in people who usually become president that a lot of us Kenyans who are analyzing this are completely ignoring and trashing. And many of us don't even know about these factors. For example, and I challenge you to do your research anywhere in any corner of the globe. For example, presidents normally come from nowhere. Okay? History has shown us that again and again and again. Anyway, a very warm welcome to my super packed show today. Twende Kasi. Are you sure you know why most people are so addicted to politics? Are you sure you know? Actually, in my opinion, one of the reasons is that in politics, anything can happen at any time. The drama, the unexpected, that is what makes politics very addictive for very many. So much so that there are many people who are so addicted in the politics, they have no time to look at the real development record of a politician and the impact of a politician in a country or in their constituency. They have no time for that. They just derive all their joy from the drama of the politics. And so, let us go for it. And let us start with the million-shilling question. In the opinion of Kumekucha Chris, which candidate is most likely to emerge as the 6th president of the Republic of Kenya, out of the ones who are interested in that very hot seat? Who? Is it true, despite the remarks from this MP from Murema, is it true that this is Kalonzo Musyoka's best chance of finally becoming president of Kenya? I will answer all those questions very conclusively on my show today. But first, please give me a very brief moment to mention our sponsors for today's show. Lemify. I'm sure you're aware of all the huge advantages you'd have using Lemify. You can send money to Kenya at the best rates and with zero fees. You can send without funding the wallet. You can send from a paybill or a till. You can also receive money from Kenya at zero fees. And of course you can still use my code, Kumekucha, which you see on your screens right now. And you'll be able to get an instant cashback. Yeah? If you're sending your first £50 in the UK, you'll be able to get a cashback of £10. If you're using euros and you send at least 50 euros, you'll be able to get a cashback of 15 euros. And if you're in the US, for sending your first $100, you'll get a cashback of $20. I highly recommend that you try Lemify today, because they're big supporters of this channel, and that'll be another way of supporting what we do here. By the way, in case you're interested in sponsoring a show, you can see on your screens right now just how affordable it is. And of course, a vast majority of our clients have realized it is very effective. Because we have been blessed here by a very unique audience, difficult to find anywhere else, all in one place. Let us start first of all by getting those remarks by MP Eric Wamumbi out of the table, out of the way. Okay? Now, it is rather obvious those remarks were a punch under the belt. Those remarks were uncalled for. Those remarks were not even accurate. Because the truth is, and this should be clear to most analysts, the truth is, Kalonzo Musyoka would have no problem defeating George Wajackoyah, the weed professor, or even Peter Salasya in a presidential election. He would not struggle to beat those two. Okay? Let us just agree. Those are the facts on the table. And one simple reason is that Bwana Musyoka has been at this for a very long time. Yeah, when you're in politics for a long time, you learn a lot, and very important, you also pick up many supporters along the way. And therefore, a newbie coming in already has a very uphill task, even just catching up with you. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying it is impossible. People come from nowhere all the time. But what I'm saying is that these remarks by Eric Wamumbi, yeah, very malicious. In fact, they sound exactly how President Ruto would speak. That's his kind of politics. And the probability is more than high that he was instructed to speak like that. And it is not very hard to see the motive. Frustrate somebody, make them feel small, powerless, without you, so that Musyoka can join Ruto. Yeah, that appears to be the clear motive. Okay? And we know that despite very spirited, determined efforts from Ruto handlers, yeah, to rope in Kalonzo, Kalonzo has said, no, it can never happen. I am persuaded by the pressure he has already contained to join Ruto that he will never join Ruto. Okay, but I could be wrong. Hey, this is politics. Anything can happen at any time. How does somebody become president? I think that is the first thing we all need to be on the same page about, so that everything else will fall into place. Now, Jomo Kenyatta was nowhere as independence was approaching for Kenya fast. In fact, he was a jailbird. There were other front runners, Jaramogi Oginga Odinga, Tom Mboya, Agwin Skodek, in my opinion. There were plenty of other candidates. There was no shortage of candidates, yeah, to get that slot of the first leader of independent Kenya, yeah, the founding father of the nation. But things very suddenly changed, as they usually do in politics, and tilted the scales very suddenly in favor of Johnston Kamau, yeah, Jomo Kenyatta's real name. And this was the sibling rivalry between the United States of America and Kenya's colonial masters, Britain. Of course, these two nations have always been very close allies, even during the Second World War. But the Americans were very determined to get a foothold in Africa, and they saw Kenya as the perfect place to do that. And you see, the advantage of Kenya is that they knew once they had Kenya, they would very easily be able to spread their influence to other countries neighboring Kenya, and indeed most of Africa. But the Kenyan colonial masters were not taking it lying down. I'm imagining that somebody actually said, hey, you Americans, this is our bedroom, bwana. How dare you? But the Brits did not have a viable candidate. Their policies in Kenya were coming back to bite them, because they had really suppressed their Gikuyu. Mpaka some Kenyans had to change their tribe and pretend they were Maasais in order to get a serious education. Of course, I'm talking about the late George Saitoti. And so the Brits did not have a candidate. And then they remembered This man who had lived in the country for a very long time and was now jailbird. In fact, he was in jail because the same Brits had framed him. Actually, the local colonial government. Okay? There was the mother government, the government in the UK, and then the colonial government here in Kenya. Kerere nyingi. Yeah, they knew everything. There were those two camps. And so the Brits decided very quickly, Jomo is our man. You know, sometimes in this life something can happen to you, something good, so much so that it looks like a dream, so that you have to pinch yourself frequently, yeah, to confirm that you're awake and not dreaming. And so, very quickly Jomo was released. And then, Jomo is the leader of the independent Kenya. He came from nowhere to become Kenya's first president. Although Moi was the vice president, nobody ever imagined in their wildest dreams or nightmares that this big, clumsy man who spoke with a very heavy Kalenjin accent would actually one day be president of Kenya. But there was a very serious split, yeah, amongst the inner circle, the Kiambu Mafia, with one faction being led by the president's nephew, Dr. Njoroge Mungai, and the other one led by the then AG, Charles Njonjo. They were all from the mountain, they were all from Kiambu, but they could not agree. And therefore what happened? Moi became president, compromise candidate, from nowhere. I mean, even how Moi became a politician in the first place, if you heard that story, you'd just laugh. He used to have this habit of randaing in the shopping center, local shopping center, with his family, with his young family. And everybody knew he was a born-again Christian. And the colonial government at that time was very determined to get rid of the leader of the Rift Valley, the chief of the Rift Valley at that time, who had a very serious drinking problem. He was an alcoholic. And so, naturally, to avoid a repeat of the same problem, Moi was the perfect pick. A teetotaler, a Christian, never touched alcohol. Pop! Moi was made the leader, the chief of the Rift Valley. And that is how Moi's political journey started, in case you didn't know. Emilio Stanley Mwai Kibaki was nowhere as the Rainbow Coalition took form, and most Kenyans were sure this was the coalition that was going to form the next government after we got rid of KANU and Moi's project, yeah, a candidate known as Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta. There were many other front runners until Raila at Uhuru Park said, Kibaki tosha. And so the then Othaya legislator came in from nowhere and became the third president of Kenya. Even Uhuru Kenyatta, for those of us who were analyzing politics at that time, was a very unlikely successful presidential candidate. Very unlikely. But of course, the events of 2007, yeah, where on the advice of a man called Njenga Karume, Uhuru Kenyatta became involved, yeah, in helping and defending the community. Let me just stop there, yeah. That helped a great deal. And I don't want to talk about August 2022. Kwa sababu bado naumwa. Okay? So allow me to leave that one out. My point is, presidents come from nowhere. Yeah? You know, in the game of rugby, we usually have what we call a blind side winger. Yeah, I can say most presidents are blind side wingers. They come from nowhere when you're least expecting. Pop! President. That's how it works out. Let's never forget that. It is never the obvious candidate. Never ever. I am sensing that you're still not convinced. Let me give you a quick example from the land of Uncle Sam. A peanut farmer, a humble peanut farmer, a Christian, called Jimmy Carter. Now, in my opinion, the only reason Jimmy Carter became president was simply because of the Watergate scandal, the one that brought down President Richard Nixon. And the electorate started getting very concerned about corruption in high places, evil people in high places, that now they were looking for a clean person. That's the only reason Jimmy Carter became president. Events conspired, as they usually do, to make Jimmy Carter president. Even the man who was president before Carter has an even more amazing story. A fairy tale. Gerald Ford was very unexpectedly picked as vice president after Nixon's previous vice president suddenly resigned. And Ford served as vice president for only, wait for this one, 9 months. And then Nixon resigned and he became president. Now, is that a Cinderella story or it's not a Cinderella story? What? That's how it works. Presidents usually come from nowhere. And you know, these signs of coming from nowhere, sometimes they start showing early. So I need to ask you a question. Out of the current front runners for the presidency of Kenya, which candidate so far is the one with the biggest Cinderella story? I think the answer to that question is very obvious. It is a man called Rigathi Gashagua. Rigathi Gashagua, if I can remind you, was a one-term member of parliament. One-term member of parliament. I know you had forgotten that. Okay? And then pop, he became a running mate to William Ruto. And he became deputy president of the Republic of Kenya. In my opinion, the only legally installed, according to the letter of the Constitution, deputy president of Kenya since September 2022. There is no other. Let me just leave it at that. I'm sure most of you get what I'm saying. And it is true that Gashagua was a political nobody from nowhere. And that is why he was shoved aside, thrown into the dustbin, impeached in such a shameful way. And the people who were doing it knew that they were doing it to a Mr. Nobody, who will do nothing, who has nothing, who is capable of nothing. Look what happened. Look at what happened. Today, and you know many Kenyans have refused to believe. Many Kenyans still say, I don't have time for Rigathi Gashagua. But you see, in politics, whether your heart wants it or not, whether you like it or not, circumstances can conspire to lift up that person you hate. This happens very frequently, by the way. And you find, pop, the man is suddenly so powerful. There are some Kenyans who are not happy about the rapid rise of Rigathi Gashagua. But we can't change the facts. We can't. So, what am I saying? Whether we like it or not, Rigathi Gashagua is a highly likely successful presidential candidate. Now, I already know what the law says about impeachment, and I already know what lawyers are saying. But let me remind you of something which you have forgotten so quickly. A man called Uhuru Muigai Kenyatta, another man called William Ruto. Do you remember their story? They were legally disqualified from vying for the presidency. Then what happened? Well, politics happened. Politics, my friends, happened. Yeah? Let me leave it at that for now. Now, as promised, Stephen Kalonzo Musyoka. Now, in my opinion, the circumstances are not favorable for a Kalonzo Musyoka presidency. And I'm not saying he does not deserve it. I'm not saying he's not capable. I'm not saying any of that. I'm just discussing the reality of politics. No hard feelings, no vengeful feelings, as some people like to accuse me of, towards this man who is the same tribe As my father and my late political lecturer, I have nothing against him. I'm just discussing the reality of politics. Circumstances currently in Kenya are not favoring a Kalonzo Musyoka presidency. And for many reasons. The most obvious is that most Kenyans are aching and desiring a brand new beginning for our country, the motherland. Kalonzo Musyoka does not represent that. He was in the hated KANU. Yeah, that's why he cut his political teeth. He has been around for a long time. And therefore, already there, he has a huge disadvantage. Secondly, the circumstances right now favor a candidate who will be able to take on the powerful cartels, the powerful owners of Kenya, yeah, and put as many of them as possible in jail. Okay? Now, unfortunately, Kalonzo Musyoka does not fit that profile. He is too polite. He is too diplomatic. And you will tell me, and maybe even correct me in case I'm wrong, but I have a suspicion I'm not wrong. The next president of Kenya will have to prove to the people of Kenya that they're capable of doing something drastic about corruption in the country, because corruption is suffocating the motherland. And more ordinary Kenyans are seeing this very clearly. Okay? And therefore, unfortunately, this very good presidential candidate may not ascend to the presidency because the environment, let me just call it the weather, does not favor this presidency. Now, that is my latest highly sensitive special report, and as you've been seeing on your screens, you can get it at that very, very special price of only Kenya shillings 2,999. But then, the best way out of all this, of ensuring that you never need to pay again for any Kumekucha product, whether it is a highly sensitive special report, which I produce very frequently, or a weekly intelligence briefings, or a landmark documentary, non-political, like the one on how to survive in a dead economy, kila kitu, you'll receive it without any payment. The best way of doing that is to get the Kumekucha golden key. And I have a brand new offer for that, for only Kenya shillings 6,444. Yes, the price has gone up. Okay, so you'd better rush. And so please, do everything you can to take action and get this golden key before it goes back to its proper price. Because you see, this is not annual or even for 2 years. It is permanent. And the price of 6,444 is a steal. It is an amazing offer when you think about it. And a very slight increase of only Kenya shillings 100, less than $1, is so that as many of us as possible are pushed to take action quickly in order to avoid being left out, yeah, of this very valuable key that will help you. Because going forward, there's going to be plenty of highly sensitive material you cannot share on this open channel. You can see details on your screens right now. Take action right away. Do not procrastinate. Do not postpone. All for a better Kenya. Until next time, this is Chris Kumekucha.